We're all familiar with the scenic view of Namsan Seoul Tower. But far fewer people know that a gigantic Japanese shrine once stood right here. Even less known are the strange transformations this park, just below the tower, has gone through. It's a story that's both shocking and fascinating. And Matt van Volkenburg will tell us all about it. He specializes in modern Korean history and organizes lectures and walking tours for the Royal Asiatic Society.
이름이 뭐예요?
산초.
와, 신기해요.
하나 찍어봐도 돼요?
네네네, 당연하죠. This was not planned for the introduction. What is up, everyone? I'm here with Matt van Volkenburg to explore the western slope of Namsan. There are a lot of interesting, fascinating stories to explore, right?
Oh, lots.
Let's dive into it.
Let's do it.
We explore the area behind Namsan Library, a cluster of around 9 small neighborhoods. It's mostly park where people come for a picnic and they walk with the dog or parrot, but it's layered with history. The old city wall, views of Namsan Seoul Tower, familiar K-drama filming spots, and statues scattered throughout, including this one.
So this is the statue of An Jung-gun. So An is famous as a patriot who, in 1909, assassinated Ito Hirobumi. Ito's a very interesting person because he was one of 5 or 6 Japanese students who went to England in the 1860s, I think it was, to study and learn about the West, and then came back and became the leaders of the Meiji Restoration, which modernized Japan, Japan's first prime minister, and then he was tasked with bringing Korea under control in 1905. He basically forced the protectorate on Korea, and then in 1909, right ahead of annexation, possibly causing annexation, An Jung-gun assassinates him in Harbin. And soon after liberation, they wanted to put up a statue of An, but they didn't get around to it until 1967. A few years after it was built, they realized they got new photos of him, and so they decided, oh, it's not realistic enough, so they made another one.
Okay.
Same sculptor. Then they put it here, and the original was sent to the one of the army training schools. In the 2000s, there was a lot of studies of pro-Japanese collaborators, and they realized that the guy who had done the original 2 sculptures had some questionable things in his past, so they commissioned this new statue.
The apricot tree.
The apricot tree. You shoot it like this and then reveal at the end that it's not even there, right? Because you can't see it from a low angle. There's an apricot tree, which is representative of something that happened when the Japanese invaded in the 1590s. And one of the generals, he took some of these apricot trees from, I think it was one of the palaces here, and took it back to Japan and planted it at the family temple. And then in 1999, the head monk of that temple, wanting to make some sort of amends for colonialism, brought sort of a descendant of that tree back to Korea, and it was planted here.
We can't really see it, right?
Unfortunately, it's not standing anymore.
Well, here it says it was taken from Changdeokgung.
If you're new to the channel, this is where we go around all the neighborhoods of Seoul, uncover hidden stories and history, and find beauty in every nook and cranny. After every dong, I color it on the map and move on to the next. Hopefully we can finish all 467. If you support this project, like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Welcome to my dome!
So this is the Namsan, okay, it was originally the Namsan Children's Center. So it was opened in 1970, designed by Kim Soo-gun. Kim is one of the best known sort of modernist Korean architects. He's designed a lot of interesting buildings and some that are very interesting. In fact, you were at one with Jacko recently.
Oh, the anti-communist interrogation center, yes.
The top is supposed to spin. So it's opened in 1970. Yu Kyung-soo, the first lady, wife of Park Chung-hee, was there. It served as the Children's Center until 1974 when the Children's Grand Park was built, so they opened a new center there. And then from 74 to 89, it was the National Library. I mean, it's very kind of flying saucer looking, right?
Yeah.
It's very futuristic.
I just imagine a telescope inside. Is it weird that I kind of like this building?
I mean,
architecturally it is.
It's a cool building. So we're coming down into Baekbum Square. This was built in 1969. Now it's been changed quite a bit since in more recent years. So Baekbum was the pen name of Kim Gu. Kim Gu is one of the best known independence leaders. You know, he was vying with Lee Seung-man for power after liberation.
He's also the one who got assassinated.
So, like many of Lee Seung-man's competitors, he was shot somehow. So this statue was put up in 1969 on the 20th anniversary.
As you've probably noticed by now, you're walking from story to story here, and we haven't even talked about the gigantic Japanese shrine yet. But first, I want to show you something a bit peculiar. A special apartment complex that might not be here much longer. It was recommended by Rebecca, a member of the channel.
So one of my member subscribers, she recommended me to go to these apartments.
So these are the Ho-hyeon citizens apartments. In the 1960s, the Seoul city government built a lot of citizens apartments that were usually 4 or 5 stories. They were generally pretty cheaply made. And that came to a stop in April 1970 when the WOW apartments above Hongdae, they collapsed onto the houses below. About 30 people were killed. Mayor resigned. So they put a stop to those apartments because they realized most of the ones they'd already built were so, dangerous. And they would have to spend more money than they spent building them to reinforce them. There was talk, I guess, of demolishing it early this year. There's been talks for a while, but I guess that's been put off. Since the early 2000s, there was a lot of discussion about what should happen with these, and some people think it should be preserved because it's the last example of a citizen's apartment.
Is this the last example, yeah?
I think it's the last standing one.
Oh, okay.
Of course, it's different from most because it's much taller, it's 10 stories.
Interesting bridge to the front door.
That was the first one to have a bridge like that, a sky bridge built. It also doesn't have an elevator.
So the people who live on the top floor, they have to walk the stairs? Ouch.
Yeah. Because most 10-story apartments at that time were considered luxury apartments and would have elevators. But this was a citizen's apartment, which was not a luxury apartment.
Are people still living here?
A lot of them are empty. The vast majority of them are empty. The problem is a number of people are still holding out.
This apartment, among other old apartments, had inspired the Korean Netflix drama Sweet Home. It's a structure unlike anything I've ever seen in Seoul, and I'm happy I got to see it from up close. I can totally imagine how this building has inspired, well, not only Sweet Home, but probably many dramas, movies, webtoons and whatnot. Now let's talk about that mysterious Japanese shrine that was here. Because to my surprise, not everything has disappeared.
These stairs, according to Ji-hoon Suk, these are the last remaining stairs of the Shinto shrine that was once here.
These stairs?
So these stairs were off to the side. All the main famous stairs that went down through the park, Baekbum Park, those were all, that whole area was kind of redesigned to, in a way, obscure the area where the stairs had been.
So they are gone, but these still remain.
But these are the only ones still remaining. They all went up to the Joseon Shinto shrine. So that was the one for the entire country.
Wow, I just never realized that. I saw these steps. I was like, they look like they belong to something old. There's no sign or whatsoever, right? There's nothing explaining what these steps were. Well, there's a sign saying that they used to shoot a drama here.
So yes, my name is Kim Sam-soon.
Yeah.
This was 2004 or 5. I remember, I never watched it, but I remember it was very popular at the time.
Okay.
Students would talk about it.
It was fun to look at the friends or couples climbing the steps through a game of rock, paper and scissors. My Insta followers told me it was from a K-drama or TV program or something. It's funny it happens on a colonial structure.
And now we're back at the park where we began.
We circled back to the place where An Jong-gun's statue stands. This is also where part of the old city wall was excavated and partially restored. But why was it gone in the first place? That's where the Joseon Shinto shrine story continues, because it's not just the steps that remain.
The main destruction here happened when they built the Joseon Shinto shrine, the main shrine for the entire country.
Are these the actual remains?
Yes. So
wow,
these are the posts. So it might be this building here.
Okay.
I think that's the building. So these are the remains, the base of one of the main shrine buildings that was built. This was where worship was done. Most normal people couldn't come here. So the shrine is built in 1925. They spent a lot of money on it. There were around 400 stairs coming up from the road. And of course they built the road on top of the city wall. This was where Amaterasu, the founding empress, goddess of Japan, as well as the spirit of the Meiji emperor, were enshrined in this Shinto shrine.
So to the Japanese, it was an extremely sacred place.
It was, but at the same time, the Japanese authorities, the government in general who built it, said that this was not supposed to be a religious site, but just a state Shinto shrine. It's meant to inculcate emperor worship, and it was both for the Japanese, who were living here, but they eventually started aiming it more and more at Koreans. And when Koreans first came up here, of course, it's this massive, big area. It's a nice view of the city.
Yes.
And so Japanese were complaining, like, they're not doing what they're supposed to be. They're just coming up here and hanging around. And there were stories of people bringing gisang up here on dates at night.
Oh, okay.
Nice view of the city. So, especially in the late 1930s, there was a lot of conflict with the Christian churches here because students especially, were forced to come up and bow to the emperor. Some of the different churches said, well, you know, you're just looking at your shoes. There's nothing religious about this. Yeah. But some of the churches refused to do it, and many of those churches were either closed or the Western missionaries working there basically had to leave and put Koreans in charge. It should be noted when they built this that higher up on Namsan was the Namsan shamanism shrine. And so the Japanese didn't want it there above this site. So they moved it to Inwangsan.
So then, that was the colonial era. The Japanese left the country, demolished most parts of it, and then what happened after?
Well, it's still proved to be an interesting place because you have Lee Sung-man becomes elected president in 1948. In 1956, he builds this massive statue of himself here. It's probably the first time in Korea a statue had been built of a living person. So eventually, of course, his rule becomes more and more corrupt, and the April 19th 1960 student protests break out. He's forced to step down. It takes a couple months, but they finally take that statue that was here down. The head is in someone's backyard in Haehwadong. So they build the Botanical garden in 1969, and that was there until the mid-2000s. They also had this fountain that's built in 1969. That era, basically 1969, 1970, you have the Botanical garden, the fountain, the Anjungun Memorial Hall built. You have Baekbam Square built.
Yeah.
So it's that period where there's a lot of changes.
But there's more.
There's still more.
There's still more.
I hope you can keep up with us because we're not done yet. And we must bounce back to the colonial period again, as the Japanese built more than a state shrine here.
So we have an emergency bunker here.
Basically in the 1930s, as the war intensifies with China, Japan orders that bunkers be built around the city. This one they just uncovered when they were doing the excavations, like less than a decade ago.
Oh, so they didn't know it was here?
No. At that time, as the war was intensifying, a lot of these bunkers were built around the city. And so this is kind of a typical one, because they're normally dug deep into the mountain. You can find these throughout the city, throughout the country.
Now it's getting even crazier. We continue along the Pork Cutlet Street to the campus of Sungi Women's University, where we can find the remains of, and maybe you can guess already what it is, of another Shinto shrine. I didn't know there were even more shrines built. If it weren't for Matt, I would have never known there was any evidence left for us to see.
In 1898, they build the Gyeongsang Shinsa. And then just behind us here, we can see what the Shinsa, the shrine, looked like. This was the really religious shrine. When shrine is built in 1925, there's actually a lot of competition. And so the authorities are saying, well, look, this one, the big one, isn't really a religious shrine. It's just a state shrine, so, don't worry about it. But there ends up being a lot of competition, like for weddings, because they start having weddings up there, and the schools get indignant, and you can't. That's how they make their money. They also built some other shrines, and we can actually go look at the remnants.
Right next door, at a high school and elementary school, there are remnants of yet another Japanese shrine. Yes, I know, crazy. I guess Namsan is full of surprises, and it won't even be the last surprise in this video.
So we can see them right here.
Oh, what? So these are the remains of what exactly?
This area was the Nogi Shrine. It's built in 1934. So General Nogi Marasuke was a general who led the attack on Port Arthur during the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. They lost more men trying to take that hill so that they could take the city than they lost in the entire Sino-Japanese War 10 years earlier. So he was criticized for having lost so many men, but then also in another battle, he lost 2 of his sons. So there are kind of people are like, oh, okay. He wanted to commit suicide to atone for what he had done, and the emperor, Meiji Emperor, refused, wouldn't allow him to do it. And so after Meiji died, Nogi and his wife committed suicide together. He's seen as this, epitome of loyalty. So they built this shrine here in 1934.
So yeah, we have this and maybe that stone.
Some sort of,
It's like the foot of the pillar.
If you walk down a little more, you will find the newly built Namsan Yejang Park with certain ruins. And again, we're not done with the colonial era yet.
And that was the location of the original Japanese, well, residency general, and then later government general. Most people are familiar with the big government general building that was in front of
Gyeongbokgung Palace.
So the Protectorate Treaty was forced on Korea in 1905. 1907, they built the residency general for the resident who is now in control, of course, Ito Hirobumi, the man who An Jung-gun assassinated. On this location was the interrogation building for the KCIA.
The famous one.
And so this is where, a lot of dissidents, a lot of people were arrested. You would hear that someone was taken to Namsan.
Yes.
And that meant here.
I believe one of the remaining KCIA buildings is the youth hostel, not far from the park. So, as you have seen, there's a lot of dark history, all layered on top of each other. But what I also noticed is how people are enjoying Namsan today. The slopes of the mountain have really been reclaimed by the people. Whether it's on top of old colonial remnants, next to the old city wall, or on the spot where people used to be tortured, it's all in the past now. This short walk, because it's in fact all close to each other, was more than interesting. I'll put it on the map as the place that symbolizes colonialism and authoritarianism no more. See you in the next neighborhood. Haru!
To get your rations during the war, you had to prove that you would come up here. You might come up here and get a stamp or something. And as well, if you were on the streetcar going by down below, when you got close to the shrine, you had to turn and bow to it. Yeah.